Welcome to Mind Over Matter, where personal power meets soulful purpose. Today, we are joined by the deeply insightful Hans Hageman, a non-profit visionary, coach, and founder of Curatia Leadership, with a life that bridges Ivy League halls and prison yards. Hans brings raw truth, timeless wisdom, and the spiritual tools needed to reinvent ourselves from the inside out. If you have ever questioned your path, battled burnout, or longed for deeper purpose, this is your compass. Welcome to the show, Hans. It's an honor to have you.
And it's an honor to be a guest here. Thank you.
Mhm. So, your theme, from survival to significance, is so powerful. What does that shift look like for someone facing grief, burnout, or a midlife identity crisis?
I a lot of how I view things comes from a mix of different philosophies, including Stoic philosophy. And when we die, there's the tombstone, and there's the year we were born, the year we died. But what makes the most difference is that dash in the middle. What have you done with your dash? And if you can look at grief or challenge or obstacles as opportunities for growth, and it's not easy to do, but if you can do that, then you will be living to the fullest extent possible in your life. And a lot of times when we think that we are grieving, what we're actually grieving is a past version of ourselves. And when we've identified with that past version of ourselves, we don't see any room for growth. We don't see any room for hope, and we're lacking direction. And you mentioned the compass. The compass is important. Too many people want to have a map, and they need to have the direction laid out for them, but the compass is a more useful tool in terms of providing the direction.
Absolutely. So, was there a personal turning point where you felt called to let go of who you thought you were?
I've had several points where I've had to let go of past identities. When I was much younger, well, a child, I knew, I just knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. And that came about for a number of reasons. One is my father played a role I set out to do. And anything else along that path was just kind of a check mark to get me there. I was an avid reader. We didn't have a lot of money in my family, but one thing that my parents never denied us were books. So we'd go to the bookstore, and if there was a book that we wanted, didn't matter what kind of book, that's what we did. And so I had a very generalized base of knowledge and the map to becoming a lawyer, which I eventually did become. And I practiced law for 9 years, and I'm glad I did. And I'm glad that the people that I helped in my role as an attorney were in my path, and I think it was meant to be. Uh, but at some point, I needed to move away from that, and I went to some very good schools, Ivy League schools, both for law and undergraduate. And I worked at some important places in terms of the law. I worked as a chief counsel for a United States Senate subcommittee. I was a prosecutor in a very important prosecutorial office in the country in New York City. I helped start a public defenders group, but at some point, my parents' health uh, became an issue, and I needed to take care of them. And that combined with looking at a lot of the people I had come across in my practice of law, young people who did not have the options that I had, who did not get the breaks that I got, led me to question whether law was the best path for me going forward. And so I made the decision to start a school in New York, an independent school. And there weren't a lot of independent schools in communities like mine, a very poor community. And people said, you can't do this. You don't have the money to do it. You don't have the space to do it. But I was committed to doing it. And one of the first shocks to my system was when I declared my intention to start a school. and give up the practice of law, that identity as a lawyer, I had people who I had considered friends completely disown me. They wouldn't return my phone calls. They we didn't socialize anymore because they had also bought into my identity as this Ivy League lawyer. And so I began the path to the school. And the school, that path, and I started it with my brother, who was trained as a teacher and but was also looking for something different. That was 30 plus years ago. He is still running the school. But that was the first shift in identity, the first loss, the first thing that I had to grieve professionally anyway. Um, uh, and that let open my eyes to how a lot of the world actually does work. So that was the first case. I then moved on from the school when my brother and I were clashing over philosophies of education, uh, and I took over a very large nonprofit, 350 employees from the small school that I had started and moved on from. That wasn't quite the same shift in identity, but it was pretty large. Another shift came when I moved from New York City to rural New York State, and again, I had grown up for decades in New York City, and that's how I was identified. That's how people identified me. But that was yet another shift. During my time in upstate New York, after about 20 years of marriage, my wife decided that she no longer wanted to be married to me. My identity as a married person and father, that was about to shift and change, and I had to adjust. Part of my adjustment there was then to I had to sell the family home and property, and I moved to a place in the United States, the Mississippi Delta, which is the poorest region of the United States, and however you measure it. And that was to bring back to life a community center that had been started by some nuns in the 1980s. And so for 2.5 years, I've been down here in the Mississippi Delta. And I actually had friends just before I moved to the Mississippi Delta who said, love you to death, but if you die down in the Mississippi Delta, we're not coming to your funeral. I mean, they literally said that and they were serious. They've since softened that position. So whether it was my identity as a lawyer, my identity as and during the time where I was a nonprofit leader running both my small school, then later on that large institution, I met anybody of any fame in America that you could hope to meet. Whether it was the poet and author Maya Angelou, or Oprah Winfrey, or Beyonce, or Jay-Z. I met all the stars who respected the work that I was doing, and I gave that up when I moved to upstate New York, and certainly when I moved to the Mississippi Delta. So there have been several stops along the way, and some of them personal, some of them professional, but each time I've had to figure out, who am I? And my motto is, I am becoming an ancestor worth remembering, and I have that as my North Star.
That's a powerful lens. Moving from proving to being, your honesty gives other permission to soften into change.
And people sometimes need that permission. It's interesting because if you've grown up a certain way, you are not going to give yourself that permission. And it's I've seen that in fact across cultures. And so it wasn't just my own journey in the United States, but at one point I started a girls' school in a place called Lucknow, India, for Hindu and Muslim girls. Um, and the girls there, they had been told, this is who you are, this is your path in life. You Because nobody in your family for generations has deviated from it, there is no reason for you to believe that you should deviate from it. But my mission with my local partners was to get them to believe in themselves, was to get them to give themselves permission to embrace and envision a greater, more powerful life for themselves. And we did that over the course of 10 years. Same thing happened for students who I encountered in Senegal in Africa. So yeah, people, whether it's the United States or all the way around the world from the United States, it's very tough for them to give themselves permission, and sometimes they need somebody to intervene, and that's been part of my path as well.
That's amazing. So, you frame resilience as a spiritual practice. How do tools like breathwork and tapping shift more than just our nervous system? How do they shift identity?
For too many of us, we when we try to make a change, there are tools which, unfortunately, those tools also aren't well known, but those tools have to do with a cognitive shift, the conversations that we have with ourselves, the things that we tell ourselves we believe, and that can be very powerful. It's important for us to be able to label the emotions that we have, but it's also important to be able to act. And if all we're doing is staying up in our heads, telling ourselves a particular story, we're going to stay stuck in that story, and there won't be any motion, any path forward. So something like breath work or somatic awareness brings us in touch with who we are fully as a human being, and how we are moving through life. And whether there are a couple of tools that I am particularly fond of. One is just movement in general. The body isn't just the bus to carry the brain. It's more than that, and we need to embrace that and learn to move. And when we do that, we get in touch with our vagal system. We get in touch with our spatial awareness. We get in touch with our place in the earth and how we're moving through it. And often the body reflects our thoughts, our body reflects whatever truth we think we have at the time. And when you're able to free up the body, then all of a sudden we don't get to see our truth. We get to see the truth. We get to recognize the common path and journey that all of us share as humans. We're able to release emotions because there's Dr. Bessel van der Kolk talks about the body keeps the score. And so anything that we've experienced, and as humans, we have what's called a negativity bias. And that's for survival. We notice the negative more than we do the positive. Breath work, things like emotional freedom technique, which is tapping, general movement, that allows us to free up what's been held in our body, what's been held in our nervous system, what is held in our non-conscious mind. And once we're able to do that, we're then able to not only free up movement, free up our health, but we're also able to access thoughts and change our beliefs and move into a different system that will allow us who we were meant to be as when we were placed on the earth.
Absolutely. So, is there one tool or ritual that's been foundational in your own healing journey?
Breath work is the main one, but I think for anyone, when you mentioned ritual, I think that is critical. I think whatever you do, whether it's breath work, whether it's tapping, otherwise known as emotional freedom technique, whether it's prayer, that it's important that it become a ritual, that it become a habit, that it become something that is non-negotiable, that when you describe yourself, you see yourself and say about yourself, I'm a person who engages in a breathwork practice. I'm the kind of person who engages in prayer. I'm the kind of person who engages in meditation. I'm the kind of person who engages in movement. So whatever the tool, as long as it becomes a ritual, as long as it becomes a habit, that's most important. For me, I do breath work. In the field of breath work out here right now, there's most of it is energetic breath work and a lot of breath holds and rapid breathing. And that can be good. And I do it for myself, but I'm trained in how to do that. For too many other people, it can be triggering. So a steady breathwork practice, for instance, there are two famous ones, patterns. One is 4-7-8, where you take 4 seconds to inhale, 7 seconds holding the breath, and then 8 seconds to exhale. That's one. Another one is box breathing. That's where you take 4 seconds to bring the breath in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds to exhale, and then another 4 second hold. And it's important to do that. And those are practices that I do along with morning meditation and prayer. And again, they're non-negotiable. And it's every morning. They're the first things that I do before I open up email, before I eat anything. And they become a habit. They become part of how I define myself. And just one other note on the breath: when people breathe, too often they breathe high up in the chest. Ideally, if you place your hands on your rib cage, make a V with your thumb and your fingers and encompass that rib cage. When you breathe in on the inhale, those ribs are expanding. And on the exhale, the ribs are collapsing. Too often we breathe up high in the chest and the neck, and that creates other messages. uh, During a practice, it's important to engage the 360-degree cylinder of our breathing apparatus. Other times, depending if I'm getting ready to make a presentation, I'll do what's known as tapping, and there's certain points on the body that you tap, and some of it's a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance, where you're accepting the current state that you're in. You're tapping on different energy points that are recognized in acupuncture and other systems of healing, and then eventually you're moving continuing to tap, you're moving through to statements of power and place. And so there are a number of techniques, but the most important one is to pick one, stick with it, make it a habit, make it a ritual.
It's incredible how these practices not only restore but reconnect us to who we really are beneath the noise.
And it not only reconnects us to who we are beneath the noise. If we There's a concept in when you're talking with somebody, called mirroring and matching, right? So that to establish rapport. But the other thing, and I've done this in places like with students from Princeton University, and in a maximum security prison for teenage boys who have committed extremely violent crimes. When you get them to breathe together, to sample the same awareness of their place at that time, in that moment, then all of a sudden there's a certain level of harmony in not just yourself as the practitioner, but in that group of people that you have joined in the breath work with. Yeah, there's a sense of place and a sense of community that, because of the scale and rapidity with which life hits us, we're often unable to access. But through the breath, we can do that. We can mirror and match the person or people who are with us. And one of my big dreams is to be able to engage in that large scale breathwork practice, with large groups of people, not just a group of 5 or 6 or 7, but and train people to be able to do that, so that they all again experience that same sense of awareness and aliveness on the planet.
Absolutely. So, Hans, you speak about becoming an ancestor worth remembering. What does that mean in daily life? Not just conceptually, but practically.
Well, practically, and again, it's part of my ritual, and I need to adhere to it more than I currently do. But one of my goals is to say, who am I at my best, and what will that look like today? And I try to remember that in any interaction with any human across from me, whether it's customer service when it's on the phone, or somebody walking down the road where I live. At my best, how do I want to be seen? What energy do I need to bring to that moment? And too often, in, the goal for me is to be discerning, and that's to look at a situation, sometimes analyze it, have an awareness of the situation, but without the emotion. Because what ends up happening too often is people become judges of other people, judges of their own situation, judges of themselves. Um, but moving through life on a daily basis, it's to be more discerning. It's to be, who are you at your best? When people describe you out of your presence, how do you want them to describe you? How do you want to be seen? And that's my goal. I think I've done okay at that, but it's always having that in the forefront of my mind, as opposed to, again, the stories that people outside of me will tell me about myself, accepting those stories, and then always acting in reaction to other people's stories. I'm the one that's the storyteller of my life, and I have a particular story that I want to be told.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. So, how can listeners start embodying legacy today, even if they feel lost or unseen?
There's part of it is, and again, I have something called the rise method, where you recognize where you are in the moment. Um, then you all of it once you do that, then you integrate, who do you want to be? What's your core state? Is it one of peace? Is it one of confidence? Is it one of love? And ideally, we embody all of that, and there are different embodiment practices for that. Then you need to make the shift. Figure out what you want your future self to be and look like, and then you step into that future self, your future self. You create an identity statement such as, I am the kind of person who, and live into that, step into that. That's where breath work and tapping can also help. Have your morning identity rituals. Start each day by reading that identity statement. And I have different ways that I can help people with that. And then you align your actions with that identity statement.
That's such an anchoring thought. Legacy isn't built someday, it's built daily.
And developing our legacy contribution plan, and then write that out. Outline, how do you want to contribute to your family, your community, the world? Is there a mentor who can help you on that path? And then each time you make progress towards that, one of the things too often that we don't do is to celebrate. We need to celebrate our small wins as we establish that identity, as we live out that purpose that we've outlined for ourselves, as we take on this new identity on the path to becoming an ancestor worth remembering.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, let's talk softness. You contrast time under tension with time under bliss. How does this shift redefine masculinity and leadership?
It's particularly with men, time under tension is a concept that's taken from weightlifting and strength training, where the more time you have under tension, the stronger you get. But it too often leaves out, again, the more feminine side, and men and women combine, and it's not, we're not talking about gender, we're talking about energies. And that time under bliss is a time where you can take a step back, look for the glimmers around you. It could be the laughter of a child, it could be a sunset, and being able to, or a friend calling you unexpectedly, or you reaching out to a friend who you hadn't spoken to in a while. Um, it's figuring out the softer sides of yourself. And for men, I think, in terms of identity, I think men need to embrace all the archetypes of being a warrior, an architect, and a healer. And that healer part is where that time under bliss comes in. You need to be at peace with yourself so that you can then learn to turn that peace that you feel for yourself out to other people. And too often we're at war with ourselves, and that shows up in our relationship with others.
That reframing is radical and so needed in a world that still mistakes hardness for strength.
Yeah, and it's become more evident now, and I think being able to embody both types of energy, people will recognize it. But again, there are not a lot of people out there training it, showing it, living it. And so, particularly our young people, they don't have the sense that there's any other way to move through life. And that's unfortunate. And part of my goal is to train the trainer to show that you can be that warrior, architect, and healer, and you can experience more of that time under bliss. And if you do that for yourself individually, then the people in your life will also be able to receive that same energy and learn to live their lives accordingly.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, Hans Hegeman's wisdom is a living meditation, a reminder that purpose isn't found, it's remembered. Whether you're rebuilding, reimagining, or simply breathing through the next moments, know this: your story can be your sanctuary, and your legacy, it begins now. Be present, be purposeful, be a name your descendants speak with pride.